Eurozone inflation came in slightly lower than expected for August at 5.2%. That's down a little from July, but still higher than the ECB's target of 2%. Denmark, Spain, Belgium had the lowest rates of inflation, below 2.5%, while Hungary, Czechia, and Slovakia each saw their prices near or above 10%. Services, food, industrial goods, energy contributing to the most to inflation in August. And the Organization for Economic Development, or OECD, sees headline inflation for many countries coming down, but says core inflation remains persistent. In its interim economic outlook on Tuesday, the OECD says that means central banks must keep rates high until inflation comes down, and also recommends government adjust fiscal policy to prepare for future needs such as aging populations, climate change, and debt, plus to lower trade barriers, especially in services, to boost productivity and growth. And for more on the world of the global economy, John Quelch, professor at the Miami Herbert Business School. Good to see you, Professor. You seem to be all smiles, but we're against a backdrop of a lot of, I guess not unusual news, but let me just start with this potential government shutdown. Is that something we need to worry about or not?
It's becoming painfully repetitive, Phil, to have to go through this charade, if not every month, every quarter. It's a grotesque distraction from the principal issues that are facing the global and U.S. economy in particular. I'm sure there will be a resolution. It'll be in the last 48 hours prior to the deadline, but I've no doubt that they'll cry wolf one more time, and once again there'll be some resolution that will prevent the shutdown. Though it does appear that the likelihood is going to be a little bit higher this time than on previous occasions, but I'm still pretty confident that we'll get to a resolution on this.
Yeah, it seems crazy. We just talked about this probably a few months ago, and here we are again. The federal deficit, the 33 trillion. I don't know if you heard what we talked about earlier. Yes. A new high, and I'm going to tie the Fed decision to the deficit here together for you, because the Fed sets rates. The rates ultimately impact Treasury bills, which we as the U.S. issue to pay for the debt. So we're really just setting our own interest that we're going to pay to ourselves or to other countries, whoever debt we owe money to. It seems to me that what the Fed wants and what the White House or what the rest of the country might want perhaps are not the same thing.
It's a nice analysis. I mean, one of the reasons for the profligate spending since the financial crisis has been, ironically, that interest rates have been low, and therefore the ability of the government to borrow at low interest from not just the U.S. Economy, but from the global economy, has been a fuel to increased government spending. Now, of course, with interest rates having soared in the last year and a half due to the need to combat inflation, those costs of debt service are much higher than they were 2 years ago. So finally, the chickens are coming home to roost on that one. But let me just point out one thing. Often the total deficit is considered in the context of annual GDP. It should also be considered in the context of the total asset value of the U.S. economy. And when looked at in that light, the size of the cumulative deficit vis-a-vis the asset value of the economy, that's significantly under 10%.
Right. I'll give one more to you. I saw one government official talk about the metric should be interest payments versus GDP, but we could go on about this for a long time. The bottom line is we shouldn't have so much debt. I'm in the camp that this has to get under control, because ultimately it impacts all these policies that you're trying to do to slow the economy down, which the Fed tomorrow, we'll get kind of a little mini report card from them. The street's not expecting them to raise rates. There's some chatter about maybe November. But at this point, I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Federal Reserve secretly is okay with 3% inflation and employment being up a little bit and just kind of leaving everything alone. If they do any more, potentially this leaks into next year, and we all know what happens next year. It's a presidential election, and it does become political.
Well, I think it's actually been political for the entire period that Powell has been the chairman, to be frank, especially after he was re-upped for the second term. You know, the situation is that the inflation is still stubborn. And you reported correctly that it's higher than expected still in Europe. Last week it was reported higher than still expected in the US. And accordingly, in my opinion, there has to be another rate increase in November. They're going to pause tomorrow because the markets are basically concluding that there has to be more data coming in before another rate increase can be implemented. But I would fully expect to see them go another round in November. And I think that's what the OECD would expect as well. But as you say, behind the scenes, though no one, especially Powell, can come out and publicly say, okay, I'm good with 3% now, even though I've been insisting on 2%. He can't publicly say that.
Look, I mean, it just
Behind
doesn't,
the scenes,
it
you're
doesn't
probably
make
right.
sense. It doesn't make sense to sink the job market and sink the economy over that 1% difference on the inflation numbers. But who am I? Who are we? I guess we'll find out in 24 hours what they decide to say. John, Professor, good to see you, my friend.
Always a pleasure, Phil. Thank you.